The air in the cockpit of the Bombardier Global 8000 was thick with the scent of ozone, expensive leather, and the impending storm front rolling over the Westchester County Airport. Captain Marcus Thorne, a man whose 55 years were etched into the stern lines around his eyes, and the silver at his temples, ran a practiced hand over the polished yoke. He was a pilot of the old school, a man who believed the sky was a kingdom ruled by discipline, experience, and an unspoken code of conduct he'd inherited over 3 decades of flying. He didn't just fly planes, he commanded them, and he expected the world on the ground to conform to the rigid hierarchies of his airborne domain. "Pre-flight complete. Systems are green," he grunted over his shoulder, not bothering to look back. He assumed he was talking to Jenna, the flight attendant, whose primary job, in his view, was to ensure his coffee was black and the client's whiskey was aged. "I'll double-check the fuel load calculations against the manifest, Captain." The voice was not Jenna's. It was a clear, measured alto, carrying an undercurrent of calm authority that made Marcus's fingers momentarily freeze over the flight management system. He swiveled his leather seat around, a frown already creasing his brow. Standing in the narrow doorway was a woman he had never seen before. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, and wore the crisp white shirt and black trousers of a pilot's uniform with an unnerving poise. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, professional chignon, and her face, framed by the uniform's sharp collar, was a canvas of calm focus. She was also, Marcus noted with a flicker of irritation, black. He let out a short, dismissive sigh. "Operations was supposed to have the cabin detailed an hour ago. You're cutting it fine. Mr. Sterling arrives in 20 minutes, and he doesn't appreciate delays." The woman's expression didn't change. She stepped fully into the cockpit, the space suddenly feeling smaller. She placed a well-worn leather flight bag onto the vacant right-hand seat, the first officer's seat. "I'm not with the detailing crew, Captain Thorne. I'm Evelyn Reed, your first officer for the flight to Geneva." Marcus stared at the flight bag, then back at her face. The hum of the avionics cooling fan seemed to grow louder in the ensuing silence. A slow, incredulous smile stretched his lips, but it held no warmth. It was the smile of a man who had just heard a particularly foolish joke. "You're mistaken," he said, turning back to his instruments as if her presence was a minor clerical error he could ignore into non-existence. "I'm flying with Henderson today. Senior first officer. I specifically requested him." "Henderson called out sick this morning. A stomach bug," Evelyn said, her voice even. She didn't wait for an invitation, moving with an efficient grace to take her seat. She began adjusting the rudder pedals with a practiced familiarity. "Dispatch assigned me. I assure you, Captain, I'm more than qualified." Marcus swiveled back around, his face now a mask of undisguised annoyance. The thin veneer of professional courtesy had evaporated. "Look, I don't know what diversity initiative you're a part of, or who you know in human resources, but this isn't some regional hop in a Dash 8. This is a Global 8000. It's an $80 million intercontinental thoroughbred, and my client is Arthur Sterling. He's not just a passenger. He's the man who signs the checks for this entire fleet. He expects a certain caliber of crew." Evelyn paused her pre-flight setup, her hand hovering over the checklist. She turned her head to face him, her dark eyes unblinking and direct. "I'm type-rated for the Global Series, the Gulfstream G700 and the Falcon 10X. I have over 6,000 flight hours, 2,000 of them as pilot in command. I was an instructor and check airman on the G850 before I came here. Now, would you prefer we review my logbook, or would you like to start the before-start checklist so we can be ready for Mr. Sterling?" A vein pulsed in Marcus's temple. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone who, in his mind, hadn't earned the right to be there. In his world, co-pilots were apprentices. They were deferential. They looked like younger versions of himself. Evelyn Reed looked like she belonged on the board of a tech company, not in the right seat of his cockpit. "Pilot in command?" he scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms in a gesture of paternalistic disbelief. "Flying what? Empty cargo legs over the Midwest? Simulator hours? I know how the game is played. They fast-track people like you to make the corporate brochures look good. They're scared of lawsuits." "I earned every single hour, Captain," Evelyn replied, her voice dropping a fraction, taking on a harder, steelier edge. "And I would suggest we focus on our duties. Mr. Sterling is famously punctual, and the weather over the Atlantic isn't improving." "Don't you dare lecture me about my client or the weather," Marcus snapped, his voice rising. "And don't get comfortable. You are not flying this aircraft with me." Evelyn raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm on the manifest. The flight plan has been filed with my credentials. The weight and balance are calculated for 2 crew members. Unless you plan on flying this jet solo across the ocean, which is not only against company policy, but a federal aviation regulation, you need a first officer." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his large frame filling the cramped space. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one he'd used on nervous junior pilots for years. He wanted her to shrink, to apologize, to admit she was out of her depth. But Evelyn Reed didn't flinch. She simply continued her flow, her fingers dancing across the overhead panel, flipping switches with a quiet confidence that infuriated him more than any argument could. "I am not flying with you," Marcus repeated, spitting the words out like poison. "It's a matter of safety. Crew resource management is built on trust and synergy. I look at you and I don't see a pilot I can trust when we're over a dark ocean with an engine out. I see a box-ticking exercise that's going to get us all killed." She stopped her work. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her hands coming to rest in her lap. When she looked up at him, her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were like polished obsidian. "Are you refusing to fly with me based on an assessment of my skills, Captain? Or are you refusing to fly with me because I am a black woman?" "I am refusing to fly because I am the captain, and my word is law on this aircraft," he bellowed, his voice echoing into the silent cabin behind them. "That seat is my responsibility. Now get your bag and get off my plane. I'm calling dispatch and telling them to get a real pilot down here, now." The drumming of the rain against the windshield intensified, providing a chaotic soundtrack to the frozen tension inside. Evelyn didn't reach for her bag. Instead, she reached into her breast pocket and produced a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. She clicked the pen and methodically noted the date, the time, and the tail number of the aircraft. "What in God's name are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "Documenting this interaction for my report," she said calmly, her handwriting neat and precise. "Captain Marcus Thorne, refusal to fly with a designated and qualified crew member without legitimate cause, violation of company anti-discrimination policy, creation of a hostile work environment." Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh. "A report? You think you can write me up? I outrank you, sweetheart. I'm the one who files the reports. I'm the one they listen to." He snatched the satellite phone from its cradle, his movements jerky with anger, and punched in the speed dial for the operations center. Evelyn watched him, her face a serene mask. She knew who would answer. It would be Dave Miller, the director of operations. Dave was a former pilot who had traded the cockpit for a desk years ago. He was a man who prized peace above all else, especially peace with his senior captains, who are notoriously difficult to replace. "Ops Thorne here," Marcus barked into the phone. "Yeah, we've got a problem. Who the hell is Evelyn Reed? I don't care what her file says, Dave. Send someone else. No, not in 2 hours. Now. Sterling is on his way." There was a pause as Dave spoke on the other end. Marcus rolled his eyes, pacing the small galley area just behind the cockpit. "Listen to me, Dave. She's arrogant. She's got a chip on her shoulder. The attitude is all wrong. It's a bad fit, a safety risk." "What?" "No, of course it's not because she's, you know." "Don't be ridiculous. This is about experience. It's about instinct. My gut tells me she's not ready for this seat." Evelyn heard every word. A familiar, hot coil of anger tightened in her chest. The cumulative weight of 1,000 similar moments. A career spent having to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. But she pushed it down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Emotion was a liability at 30,000 feet. Procedure was her shield. "Dave, just listen," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sterling is paying over 100 grand for this round trip. Do you want him to walk up those stairs and see a diversity hire in the right seat? He wants to see grey hair. He wants to see a man who looks like he's wrestled a thunderstorm and won. It's about confidence. If she freezes up over the North Atlantic, it's my license on the line. I am grounding this flight until you get Henderson or someone like him down here." Marcus paused, listening, his face contorted in frustration. Fine. Tell Sterling there's a technical issue. A flickering EGT gauge on engine 2. Something plausible. We'll stall him. Just get her off my aircraft." He slammed the phone back into its cradle with a definitive crack. He turned to Evelyn, his face alight with smug victory. "There. It's handled. Henderson's replacement is on his way, but it will take at least 90 minutes. You're dismissed." Evelyn didn't move. She glanced at the engine indication and crew alerting system display. It was, as she knew it would be, clear. All systems were green. Henderson's alternate lives in Stamford. With this weather and the traffic on I-95, he's 3 hours away, minimum. Mr. Sterling's car is 5 minutes out. You're going to lie to a client, falsify a technical fault, and delay an intercontinental flight, all because of your prejudice? It's called exercising my command authority, Marcus sneered. Something you clearly know nothing about. Now, for the last time, are you going to walk off this plane? Or do I have to call airport security and have you removed as a trespasser? "I am not trespassing," Evelyn said, her voice still infuriatingly level. "I am the assigned first officer, and for the record, Captain, lying about a mechanical fault is a serious violation. It's not just company policy. It's a breach of federal aviation regulations. It's fraud." "It's protecting the asset," Marcus roared, leaning in so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "And you, Miss Reed, are a risk to the asset." At that exact moment, the main cabin door hissed open. Jenna, the flight attendant, hurried in, looking flustered and damp from the rain. She carried a tray with a silver coffee service. She stopped dead in her tracks, sensing the toxic atmosphere in the cockpit. "Captain, is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes darting between Marcus's crimson face and Evelyn's unnaturally calm demeanor. "No, Jenna, it's not," Marcus said, straightening his tie as if reasserting his authority. "Miss Reed here was just leaving. She's been reassigned." Jenna looked at Evelyn, confused. "Oh, I already set out her crew meal." "Throw it out," Marcus commanded coldly. "She won't be needing it." Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. In the confined space, she seemed taller than she was, her posture ramrod straight. She picked up her leather flight bag. "I will step out of the cockpit to allow you to calm down, Captain," she said. "But I am not leaving this aircraft. I have a duty to this flight and to the client." "You step 1 foot out of this cockpit, you step onto the tarmac," Marcus threatened, his voice a low growl. "If you are still on this plane when Arthur Sterling arrives, I will have you arrested for interfering with a flight crew." "You're making a monumental mistake, Marcus," Evelyn said, using his first name for the first time. It hung in the air not as an informality, but as a final, solemn warning. "The only mistake was the day they hired you," he shot back. Evelyn walked past him into the main cabin. The interior was a study in understated luxury, cream leather seats, polished walnut trim, and brushed platinum fixtures. The air smelled of wealth. She placed her bag on one of the plush passenger seats near the front of the cabin. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus demanded, following her out, his heavy footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. "Get off my plane." "I'm waiting for the client," Evelyn said, turning to face him. She sat down in one of the passenger seats, crossing her legs with an air of detached patience. "If you're going to inform Mr. Sterling that his flight is delayed due to a critical engine sensor failure, I believe I should be present to hear it. Since, in your professional opinion, I am not a real pilot, my presence in the passenger cabin should pose no threat to your safety." Marcus's face went from red to a mottled purple. He opened his mouth to scream at her, but was cut off by the sight of a black Mercedes Maybach pulling up to the aircraft steps. Its headlights cut through the grey, rain-swept afternoon. "He's here," Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus swore, a violent, guttural sound. He jabbed a finger at Evelyn. "Fine. You sit there. You be a passenger. But you keep your mouth shut. If you say one single word to Mr. Sterling, I will personally ensure your career in aviation is over before it's even begun. You're just dead weight. Do you understand me?" Evelyn didn't reply. She simply smoothed the crease in her trousers and turned her gaze toward the cabin door, which was now opening. The aircraft steps were being lowered into place. With a visible effort, Marcus composed himself. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his hair, and plastered on his captain's face, a mask of confident, charming authority. He stepped toward the entrance to greet the titan of industry, leaving Evelyn sitting in the first row. He believed he had won. He believed he had silenced her and relegated her to the status of an irrelevant passenger. He was about to learn that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. Arthur Sterling was a man who moved through the world as if he owned it, which in many respects he did. As the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a global logistics and private equity firm, his time was measured in market fluctuations and billion-dollar acquisitions. He stepped into the warm, opulent cabin of the Global 8000, shaking droplets of rain from a bespoke cashmere coat. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky, sharp, analytical, and missing nothing. He didn't so much as glance at Jenna as she offered a hot towel. His focus was singular. The cockpit. "Thorne," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "The tower has our clearance. Why are the engines not spooled? I need to be in Geneva by morning. The consortium meets at 9. Marcus intercepted him in the aisle, his practiced smile looking brittle at the edges. He cast a nervous, sidelong glance at Evelyn, who was seated quietly in chair 1A. She had taken a thick technical manual from her flight bag and was reading it with an expression of intense concentration, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. "Mr. Sterling, sir," Marcus began, his voice dropping to a confidential, man-to-man tone. "A pleasure to have you aboard again. Unfortunately, we've encountered a small, unexpected issue. A technical snag." Sterling's sharp eyes narrowed. He tapped the face of his Patek Philippe watch. "A snag? Thorne, I pay your company 7 figures a year for this charter, specifically because it eliminates snags. How long?" "During the final pre-flight checks, I detected an intermittent fluctuation in the exhaust gas temperature gauge for Engine 2, Marcus lied, the technical jargon rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "It's almost certainly a faulty sensor, a minor electrical ghost. But with a transatlantic crossing ahead, I cannot, in good conscience, sign off on the aircraft until my maintenance team has a look. Safety is our absolute priority." He paused for effect. Furthermore, there was a last-minute crew scheduling issue. Dispatch sent a junior officer who isn't certified for this particular long-haul route. I've already requested my usual senior officer, Henderson. He's on his way. Sterling's gaze drifted past Marcus and landed on Evelyn. He took in her uniform, her posture, the open manual in her lap. He frowned. "Junior officer, her?" Marcus shifted his body slightly, a subconscious attempt to block Sterling's view. "Yes, sir. A simple mix-up. She's just waiting for a ride back to the main terminal. She'll be out of your way in a moment. In the meantime, may I suggest we adjourn to the FBO's private lounge? It's far more comfortable. They have a decent single malt selection." "I don't want a damn lounge," Sterling snapped, tossing his coat onto the seat opposite Evelyn. "I want to be in the air. If maintenance is on its way, I'll wait here. I have calls to make." A wave of panic washed over Marcus. If Sterling stayed, he would see that no maintenance crew was coming. He would realize the delay was stretching far beyond what a simple sensor check would require. He had to get him off the plane. "Sir, with all due respect, FAA regulations concerning maintenance procedures, Thorne." Sterling cut him off, his voice dangerously quiet as he sat down heavily in the seat directly across the aisle from Evelyn. "Pour me a Macallan 25. Neat. Then go and fix my airplane." Defeated, Marcus froze. He was trapped. With a stiff nod, he muttered, "Yes, sir." He shot a venomous glare at Evelyn, a silent command to remain silent before retreating to the cockpit. He closed the door behind him, not to call maintenance, but to sit in the captain's seat and sweat, furiously texting his replacement to break every speed limit between Stamford and Westchester. In the main cabin, the only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the quiet clink of the crystal glass as Jenna poured Sterling's whiskey. The billionaire took a long, slow sip, his analytical gaze fixed on the woman across the aisle. Evelyn could feel his eyes on her. She had encountered men like Arthur Sterling before. They were sharks who could smell blood in the water from a boardroom away. They were masters of observation, constantly assessing, calculating, looking for weakness or advantage. She deliberately turned a page in her manual. "The captain says you're not certified for this route," Sterling said abruptly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Evelyn looked up from her book, her expression neutral. "Mr. Sterling, you don't look like a trainee," he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "And you're reading the systems manual for the Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines. That's rather heavy material for someone just hitching a ride. Captain Thorne has his own criteria for what constitutes a qualified crew member," Evelyn said, her voice smooth and even. "My credentials, unfortunately, do not seem to meet his specific, unpublished standards." Sterling raised an eyebrow. He was a ruthless capitalist, not a social crusader, but he had an intense, visceral hatred for two things: incompetence and being lied to. He sensed both were in play here. "He said you weren't qualified, are you?" "I have over 6,000 hours. I am an airline transport pilot, a certified flight instructor, and I was a check airman for a rival charter service, which means I was responsible for training and certifying their captains on this class of aircraft, Evelyn stated, the facts laid out like polished stones. I am, by any measurable standard, excessively qualified for this flight. Sterling went still. He looked at the closed cockpit door, a muscle working in his jaw, then back at Evelyn. Thorne said there's a fault with an EGT gauge. Evelyn held his gaze. She made a calculated decision. Marcus had tried to erase her, to render her invisible. She would not allow it. There is no fault with the EGT gauge, Mr. Sterling. The IICAS display is clear. All systems are green. The aircraft is in perfect condition to fly. She paused, letting the words sink in. Captain Thorne is delaying this flight because he refuses to fly with me. He has invented a mechanical failure to conceal that fact. The maintenance you are waiting for is a different first officer, a white man, who is currently stuck in traffic somewhere in Connecticut. The atmosphere in the cabin instantly dropped 10 degrees. Sterling placed his glass down on the polished table with a soft, definitive click. His face became a rigid mask of fury. He wasn't angry about the prejudice. He was enraged by the deception, the inefficiency, the sheer audacity of a pilot lying to him, treating him like a fool and wasting his invaluable time. "Is that a fact, Miss Reed?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I do not lie, sir," Evelyn replied. "It's a poor allocation of resources." Sterling stared at her for a long, silent moment. He was weighing the variables, the arrogant legacy captain versus the calm, hyper-competent young officer. The convoluted lie versus the brutally simple truth. His internal calculus completed. "Jenna!" Sterling barked. The young flight attendant jumped. "Yes, Mr. Sterling? Go into that cockpit. Tell Captain Thorne I require an immediate in-person update on the status of that sensor repair. Now." Marcus Thorne emerged from the cockpit a minute later, trying to project an air of calm control. He had been composing a new lie, a more complex one, about needing a specific diagnostic tool from the maintenance hangar. The smile he wore was stretched so thin it was transparent. "Sir, good news. I've spoken with the lead technician. He's confident he can—" "Cut the crap, Thorne," Sterling said, his voice low and menacing. He stood up, a formidable presence in the confined cabin. "I've been having a fascinating conversation with your uncertified first officer." Marcus's head whipped toward Evelyn. His eyes bulged with a mixture of shock and fury. "I told you to keep your mouth shut," he hissed, forgetting for a crucial second that his billionaire client was standing right in front of him. "Excuse me?" Sterling's voice rose, sharp as cracking ice. "You will watch your tone on my aircraft. She claims the plane is perfectly fine. She claims you are stalling this flight over a personal prejudice. Now, let me be crystal clear. I don't give a damn if a trained monkey flies this plane, as long as it's competent. What I do care about is that you, my captain, are lying to my face." Marcus sputtered, gesturing wildly at Evelyn with a trembling hand. "Sir, please, you cannot possibly take the word of her. She's a diversity hire with a political agenda. She doesn't have the hands-on experience. I'm trying to protect you. That EGT gauge is a real fault. If we'd taken off, we could have had an engine flameout over the ocean. Do you want that on your conscience?" It was a bold, desperate gambit, playing on a passenger's deepest fears. For a fraction of a second, Sterling hesitated. He was a brilliant businessman, but not a pilot. He had to rely on the expert in command. Evelyn closed her manual. The sound of the heavy cover shutting was like a judge's gavel. "The EGT readings for both Pearl 700 engines are monitored continuously and fed to the crew alerting system," she said, her voice cutting through Marcus's panicked defense. She stood and stepped into the aisle, placing herself directly between the two men, her posture a column of unwavering composure. The EGT readings for both Pearl 700 engines are monitored continuously and fed to the crew alerting system, she said, her voice cutting through Marcus's panicked defense with the precision of a surgical laser. If there were a genuine, intermittent fault, even one that didn't trigger an immediate alert, it would be logged. An amber caution message, a time-stamped entry in the central maintenance computer, a fault code. We could pull it up in less than 30 seconds. She looked directly at Marcus, her eyes not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity, as if observing a specimen. Furthermore, if you truly suspected an EGT issue, your first action, your only professional action, would not be to call for a new first officer. It would be to perform a ground power run-up to try and replicate the fault. You would have maintenance on the line, talking them through the readings. But you didn't do any of that, did you? Because you know the CMC is clean. There is no fault code. There is no ghost in the machine. There is only you. You don't know what you're talking about, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking, his face slick with a sheen of cold sweat. It's a new type of ghost reading. It doesn't always trip the CMC. It's a known issue with this software build. It was a pathetic, grasping lie, and they all knew it. Then let's go look, Evelyn challenged, her voice ringing with an authority that seemed to physically push him back. Right now, you, me, and Mr. Sterling. We will walk into that cockpit, and you will show us the fault log on the maintenance page. If there is a single entry related to the EGT on Engine 2, I will apologize, walk off this plane, and you will never hear from me again. But if that log is clean, Captain, you will admit that you have lied to a client, deliberately grounded a perfectly airworthy aircraft, and committed a federal offense by falsifying a technical log. Marcus physically blocked the aisle, his body a trembling wall between them and the cockpit. He was a cornered animal, all reason replaced by raw, primal fear. You are not setting foot on my flight deck again. This is a security issue. Mr. Sterling, I am formally requesting your authorization to have this woman removed by airport security. She is unstable and is actively endangering this aircraft. Sterling looked from Marcus's wild, panicked eyes to Evelyn's cool, unwavering confidence. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He had built his empire by reading people, by understanding that desperation was the foul odor of a bad investment. Marcus Thorne was reeking of it. "Move out of the way, Thorne," Sterling commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Sir, I cannot allow—" "I said, move!" Sterling repeated, his voice dropping to a growl that promised consequences far more severe than a delayed flight. "We are all going to look at that little computer screen. If she's lying, she'll be in handcuffs. If you're lying, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Panic, pure and undiluted, seized Marcus. He couldn't let them see the screen. It was pristine. "Sir, regulations prohibit passengers on the flight deck during this kind of sensitive diagnostic procedure." "Thorne," Sterling said, taking a step closer, his voice now a venomous whisper that coiled in the silent cabin. "My family office owns the holding company that owns this charter certificate. In a very real and legally binding sense, you work for me. Now, for the final time, move." The threat, both legal and financial, was a physical blow. Marcus stumbled back, his face a mask of disbelief, sagging against the polished galley counter as if his bones had turned to water. Evelyn walked past him without a word, her shoulder brushing his. The contact felt like an electric shock to him, a jolt of finality. Sterling followed close behind. They crowded into the cockpit, the array of dark screens glowing with crisp, high-definition data, a silent testament to the aircraft's perfect health. "Show me," Sterling demanded, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Show me the fault." Evelyn's fingers moved deftly across the control panel, a fluid, practiced dance. She navigated to the maintenance diagnostic page with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours of intimacy with the machine. "Here is the log for the last 50 flight hours," she announced, her voice steady. "As you can see, it's completely clean. No faults recorded for any system, engine-related or otherwise." She then pointed to the live ECAS display, the numbers glowing in serene green. "And here are the current engine readings. EGT on engine 1, 410 degrees Celsius. EGT on engine 2, 412 degrees Celsius. Perfectly stable, perfectly normal." She turned to face Marcus, who was leaning against the doorframe, his face the color of ash. "You didn't even try to create a plausible lie, did you? You just assumed no one would ever question your authority. You assumed I was just a prop, a box to be ticked." Cornered, exposed, and utterly humiliated, Marcus's psyche fractured. All the years of unchallenged authority, of simmering prejudice and unearned superiority erupted. Instead of contrition, he chose the last refuge of the defeated: aggression. "It's a software hack," he spat, his finger shaking as he pointed it at Evelyn, a wild accusation born of pure desperation. "She did it! She must have wiped the logs when she was in here alone. This is sabotage! She's trying to frame me." "Sabotage?" Evelyn asked, her voice laced not with anger, but with a profound and weary disbelief. "Captain, I want this plane in the air. You are the one keeping us on the ground. I will not fly with an insubordinate, unqualified He caught the word on his lips, the ugly slur hanging unspoken but fully formed in the supercharged air, its poison felt by everyone. "With you, I refuse. It is unsafe. You are aggressive, you are unstable, and you are incompetent. I am the captain of this vessel, and my decision is final. I am grounding this aircraft until a competent pilot arrives." He turned his wild eyes to Sterling. "Sir, I am doing this for your safety. These people are given positions they can't handle. I've seen it 100 times. She will panic in a crisis and kill us all. I will not sign the flight release. I am grounding this plane." Sterling looked at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The bigotry was no longer veiled. It was naked and screaming in the sterile, luxurious environment. "You're grounding the plane," Sterling repeated quietly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact for a legal record he was already composing in his head. "Yes, until I have a crew I can trust." "So you are officially refusing to fulfill the terms of the charter agreement," Sterling stated, his voice flat and cold as a coroner's slab. "I am exercising my captain's authority," Marcus screamed, his chest heaving. At that exact moment, a phone chirped. It wasn't the cockpit sat phone. It was a sleek, modern smartphone from the pocket of Evelyn's blazer. The sound sliced through the tension with surgical precision. She calmly retrieved it, glanced at the screen, and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "It's Dave Miller from operations," she said, her eyes locked on Marcus. "He's probably calling to see why we haven't requested taxi clearance." "Give me that phone!" Marcus lunged, a clumsy, desperate grab for the device, for some last vestige of control. Evelyn sidestepped him with the grace of a matador, her movement so fluid and economical he was left clutching at air. She answered the call, pressing the speakerphone button, the small icon glowing like a spotlight on a stage. "Evelyn, it's Dave," the voice came through, tinny and anxious. What the hell is going on? Sterling's office is calling me every 5 minutes. Is Marcus there? Put him on. He's here, Dave, Evelyn said, her gaze a physical weight on Marcus's face. Captain Thorne has officially grounded the aircraft. He is refusing to fly with me, and he has lied to the client about a non-existent mechanical failure to justify his actions. What? Dave squeaked from the speaker. Marcus, is that true? For God's sake, man, just fly the plane. Marcus leaned toward the phone, his face contorted, a mask of righteous indignation. Dave, listen to me. She is a liability. I want her fired. I want her off the premises. I am waiting for Henderson's replacement, and that is final. Marcus, the replacement is stuck in a 4-car pile-up on the Merritt Parkway. He's not getting there for hours, Dave yelled, his voice frayed with panic. You take off now, or we lose the Sterling contract. That's the whole company, Marcus, the entire fleet. I am not flying with her, Marcus roared, the sound filling the small cockpit, a primal scream of a dying world order. Fire her, or I quit. A heavy, profound silence fell over the line. Dave was speechless. Marcus stood panting, his career on the line, his entire professional identity staked on this one, final, desperate ultimatum. He was confident he had just won the standoff. Senior captains were indispensable. Then Evelyn spoke again. But her voice had changed. The calm, professional tone of a first officer was gone. In its place was a voice of quiet, absolute command. The voice of someone who doesn't ask for reports, but reads them. Dave, she said, this is Evelyn Reed. Stop talking. The authority in her voice was so profound, so utterly unexpected, it made both Marcus and Dave fall silent. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the earth. Dave, I want you to open the corporate ownership file for this charter company. Aerojet Elite, she continued, her voice like ice water, clear and cold. Then I want you to look at the parent company that acquired it 6 months ago. What? Why? Dave asked, his voice a bewildered whisper. Just do it, Evelyn commanded. Marcus frowned, a seed of a terrible, incomprehensible doubt finally planting itself in his mind. What is this? What are you doing? A little corporate oversight, Evelyn said softly, her eyes never leaving his. They could hear frantic typing on the other end of the line, the clicking of a mouse echoing like a death watch beetle. Okay. I have it, Dave stammered after a moment. Aerojet Elite is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ethelred Aviation Group. So what? Now, click on the file for Ethelred, Dave. Read me the name listed as the president and sole shareholder. A pause. A long, agonizing silence, filled only by the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing and the drumming of the rain against the cockpit glass. It was the sound of a world holding its breath before a cataclysm. Then, Dave's voice came back, so quiet it was barely a whisper, a sound of dawning, cosmic horror. The president is E.A. Reed. Another pause, longer this time. Oh my God. Evelyn, it's you? Marcus's face went completely slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, grey pallor of a man who had just witnessed a ghost. He looked from the phone in her hand to her unreadable face, his mind refusing to process the information, the circuits of his reality shorting out one by one. What? Was all he could manage, a dry, rasping sound. I own the company, Dave, Evelyn said, her voice now resonating with the cold, hard clarity of a diamond. I bought it 6 months ago through a blind trust to evaluate its operations before I restructured it. I put myself on the line today to see how my senior captains handle pressure and unexpected variables. And I have to say, Captain Thorne, I am profoundly disappointed. The silence in the cockpit was now absolute, heavier than any storm, denser than the dark water of the Atlantic they were meant to be crossing. It was the silence of a tomb. Evelyn took a step toward Marcus, who seemed to shrink before her eyes, his large frame collapsing in on itself. "You said you don't fly with liabilities, Captain Thorne. You saw me as a risk. The truth is, you are the liability. You are a walking, talking lawsuit. In the last hour, you have exposed this company to millions of dollars in potential damages, insulted our most valuable client, violated federal law, and demonstrated a catastrophic failure of judgment that makes you unfit to command this or any other aircraft in my fleet." She turned her attention to the stunned billionaire who was watching the scene unfold with the keen, analytical interest of a man witnessing a hostile takeover in real time. "Mr. Sterling, my sincerest apologies for this employee's unprofessional conduct. He is, of course, terminated, effective immediately. If you'll permit me, I will take my rightful place in the left seat. I can have us in the air in 10 minutes. I don't need a first officer for takeoff. I can have a fully qualified replacement waiting for us when we make our scheduled fuel stop in Gander. A pilot who understands that competence is the only color that matters at 40,000 feet." She looked back at Marcus, her eyes devoid of pity, holding only the cold, dispassionate finality of an executioner. "You said your word was law on this aircraft. You were mistaken. On this aircraft, my word is the bottom line. Now get your bag and get off my plane." For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. He simply stared at her, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, rage, and shattered pride. Then, his face crumpled. It was not a look of anger, but of utter, pathetic disintegration. The carefully constructed edifice of his 55 years, the authority, the arrogance, the identity of Captain Marcus Thorne, crumbled into dust. He was no longer a captain. He was just a man, suddenly old and powerless, standing in the rain. He stumbled backward out of the cockpit, nearly tripping over the threshold. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He grabbed his flight bag from the galley, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He fumbled with the main cabin door, his hands shaking so violently he could barely work the latch. When it finally hissed open, revealing the grey, rain-swept tarmac, he didn't even look back. He simply walked down the steps and into the storm, a king exiled from his own kingdom, disappearing into the mist. Evelyn watched him go, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow exhale, she turned, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She slid into the left seat, the captain's seat. It felt different, heavier. She ran her hand over the polished yoke, her fingers tracing the worn leather, the cool blue glow of the displays reflected in her eyes. "Jenna," she said into the intercom, her voice once again calm, crisp, and professional. "Please secure the main cabin door. We're preparing for departure." A slightly trembling, "Yes, Captain," was the immediate reply. Arthur Sterling was still standing in the cockpit doorway, watching her. The fury had left his face, replaced by a look of profound, calculating respect. He had seen empires rise and fall, seen CEOs broken on the wheel of their own hubris. What he had just witnessed was one of the most efficient, ruthless, and elegant corporate executions he had ever seen. "E.A. Reed," he said, tasting the name. "Ethelred Aviation Group, Ethelred the Unready. An ironic choice for a woman who is clearly anything but." Evelyn looked up at him, a faint, weary smile touching her lips for the first time. "Ethelred was poorly advised. I make it a point to seek the best counsel, starting with my own." She began her pre-flight flow, her hands moving with an innate, confident grace across the panels and switches. The cockpit, which had been a theater of conflict, transformed into a place of serene, focused purpose. The low hum of the avionics seemed to deepen, the aircraft itself responding to the change in command. "You took a hell of a risk," Sterling noted, not moving from his spot. "Putting yourself in the line of fire like that. He could have just been a garden-variety arsehole, and you'd have simply had an uncomfortable flight." "It wasn't a risk, Mr. Sterling. It was a diagnostic test," Evelyn replied, not looking up from the flight management computer as she programmed their route. "My company is a machine, a complex one. Its most critical components are the people who operate it. I've been running stress tests on every part of the system for the last 6 months. Supply chain, maintenance, scheduling. The last and most important was crew culture. You can't learn what you need to know from a spreadsheet or a diversity seminar. You have to get in the cockpit and see for yourself who buckles under pressure, who puts their ego ahead of safety, who puts their prejudice ahead of the mission." She paused, turning to look at him directly. Thorne wasn't just a bigot. A bigot is a social problem. Thorne was a safety hazard. His ego was so fragile that he was willing to ground a perfectly good $80 million asset, lie to a client, and violate federal law rather than admit he might be wrong about someone. What would he have done in a real emergency over the middle of the ocean? Would he have listened to a first officer who looked like me if I saw something he missed? Today proved he would not. He would have let his prejudice kill us all. I didn't fire a man today, Mr. Sterling. I excised a cancer. Sterling was silent for a long time, the only sounds the soft clicks of switches and the distant whine of the APU spooling up. He finally nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "You don't just fly the plane, Miss Reed. You command the entire board." He stepped back into the cabin. "Get me to Geneva. We can discuss my company moving its entire global travel account to Ethelred when we're on the ground." Evelyn simply nodded. "Buckle up, sir. It will be a smooth ride." As she received clearance from the tower, her voice calm and measured in the familiar cadence of aviation, she pushed the thrust levers forward. The powerful Rolls-Royce engines spooled up with a deep, resonant hum, a sound of pure potential. The heavy jet rolled onto the runway, rain streaking across the windshield like tears. With a final, powerful surge, the aircraft lifted off the ground, climbing steeply into the turbulent grey sky. They broke through the storm clouds at 12,000 feet into a world of impossible, blinding sunlight. Below them, the storm was a roiling, angry blanket of grey. Above, the sky was a deep, limitless, pristine blue. Evelyn engaged the autopilot, the aircraft settling into its climb with a quiet sigh. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax, the tension draining from her shoulders. It was not a feeling of triumph. There was no joy in destroying a man's career, even one so richly deserved. There was only a profound weariness, the quiet, lonely weight of command. She had done what was necessary. She had protected her asset, her client, and the integrity of the profession she loved. She had made the sky safer. Looking out at the endless horizon, where the blue of the heavens met the curve of the earth, she felt a sense of peace. This was her domain. Not a kingdom to be ruled by the fragile egos of men like Marcus Thorne, but a realm of immense responsibility, governed by skill, by discipline, and by the unwavering truth that in the vast, unforgiving beauty of the sky, there was no room for anything but your best. And her best, she knew, was just beginning.